So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, we're going to be continuing the tafsir that we were doing. So let's see, Surah Nisa, and we went in details, in a lot of details. ليس بأمانيكم ولا أماني أهل الكتاب من يعمل سوءا يجزى به ولا يجد له من دون الله وليا ولا نصيرا. So we went in details and said من يعمل سوءا, and we said that this was a general term in where whoever does any wronghood, then of course they will actually be punished, or at least from the nature of their evil doing, that it would actually come to them. And of course, it's important to mention that the word, this may ya'mal su'an, so this is what is called al-fadh al-umum, in where it is a comprehensive term. So who's actually included in this? Is this referring to Muslims? Is this referring to kafirs? And of course, who's it really referring to? And that's why I wanted to actually take you to Tafsir al-Qurtubi to actually see what al-Qurtubi said in regards to that. And he said, فَدَخَلَ فِيهِ الْبَرُّ وَالْفَاجِرُ. He said that this would basically be an inclusive term in where whether the person is a pious person or whether the person is basically a person that is not not necessarily practicing the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is al-fajr. In other words, the person that is a transgressor, or even the person that is al-adu, the enemy, or even the person that is basically a person that is following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other words, al-awliya, or even mu'min, a believer, a kafir. And then of course, when you're looking at this hadith, you could see that yujza bihi, in where yujza bihi, it can include in dunya and in akhirah. So when you look at this ayah right there, let's look at it. Yujza bihi. So does that mean that they're going to be held accountable in dunya or in akhirah? So here he explains that no, it would actually be inclusive as well, to include dunya and to include akhirah. But of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not punish you twice for the same exact offense that you had committed. So in that situation, it's important to understand that for a believer, all right, I want you to look at this one. For a believer, whatever hardship you go through in this life, that is basically to remove the different sins that you had committed in this in this dunya. So let's see. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he basically, when he came across this ayah, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, "O Prophet of Allah, how do we correct this?" And with this ayah, that is, in other words, we see a contradiction here. How do we understand that if a believer is going to be basically لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون, and they're basically trying to do what is good, how is it that they could still be, with every single wrongdoing that they're doing, they could still be considered accountable, and therefore there's going to be this flashback that is coming at them? And of course, the Prophet ﷺ basically responded to him, and he said, غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكَ يَا أَبَا بَكْرٍ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive you, Abu Bakr. Which is, here, it's not that he had committed a sin in questioning, but this is really to tell him, to tell him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forgiven you for your misunderstanding right there. أَلَسْتَ تَنْصَبْ ألست تحزن ألست تصيبك اللأواء قال بلى قال فذلك ما تجزون به. So the Prophet ﷺ explained it to him, and he said, don't you get tired, don't you get sad and going into sorrow, don't you get into calamities and different pains and different calamities? And he said, verily, of course I do. And he said, well, this is the response, and this is the basically the explanation and the interpretation of that part of the ayah, yujza bihi. So the Prophet ﷺ explained what was ambiguous in this ayah, may ya'mal su'an yujza bihi, and therefore that piece of it in where even for a believer, you may get sick, you may get into a fever, you may get into a calamity, all of these different things, they're supposed to be sin removers. Same thing with the hadith when the Prophet, let's look at this hadith and تجزون به. Let's look at number 2. This is the resource. So Ahmad Abu Ya'la al-Tabari and من طريق وكيع به وليس في سنده okay أبي يعلى أبو بكر بن زهير okay and أخرجه أحمد أبو يعلى ابن حبان and okay okay all right. Oh, it's also, oh, there's actually a reference similar to this hadith in Sahih Muslim. So similar to this hadith in Sahih Muslim and also Sahih Musnad Ahmad from a different narrator, that is Abu Huraira. So who was the first narrator before? The first narrator was, okay, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Zuhair al-Thaqafi. Okay, so the same idea was also mentioned in Sahih Muslim, but with a different narrator, that is Abu Huraira. All right, so another narration is that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq also had the same question, or probably the different narrators had actually interpreted, I guess it was probably a setting where it was multiple questions, but then the recording of that event actually came in different quotations. The Prophet ﷺ says, أما أنت يا أبا بكر والمؤمنون فتجزون بذلك في الدنيا حتى تلقوا الله وليس لكم ذنوب وأما الآخرون فيجمع ذلك لهم حتى يجزوا به يوم القيامة. The Prophet ﷺ explained it to him, and he said, as for you, Abu Bakr, and the believers, then you would be held accountable for that in this dunya, in this life, until you would meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you are free of any sins. As for the others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the others, who's that supposed to be referring to? The disbelievers or those that are basically not the believers. فَيُجْمَعُ ذَلِكَ لَهُمْ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically accumulate that for them until they would be held accountable for it on Judgment Day. And even though right here he basically says, well, this hadith has some narrators that are weak, but of course it's important to mention this portion of it as well, and where he said وَلَيْسَ لَهُ إِسْنَادٌ صَحِيحٌ أيضا, so basically wanted to say that this hadith is not fully authentic, but something similar to this idea was still narrated. Let's see that Sayyidah Aisha was asked. So who was asking her? Ali bin Zayd an ummihi, that her mother, his mother, basically asked the Sayyidah Aisha about this ayah, إن تبدوا ما في أنفسكم أو تخفوا. So this is in Surah al-Baqarah, and we're similar to that idea. If you conceal anything within yourself, or if you reveal it, and also about this ayah, so basically this ayah right here and also this ayah right here, they kind of have some, let's say, the correlation with one another, in where this Surah al-Baqarah is saying, if you reveal what is in yourself, in other words, let's say you're thinking about something, you're thinking about killing somebody, you're thinking about doing something haram or whatever, or you're hiding it, you're not necessarily you've got the feelings, but you're not talking about it. You're not doing it. You're not implementing it, but you just thought, the idea just occurred to you. All right. It just occurred to you. So does that mean that I'll be held accountable for it? And what does it really mean? Especially with the people that might actually have some paranoia, and they might have ideas of probably killing or probably doing wrong things. And it's something that they really hate. And they absolutely are tired of it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the other surah, مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ, any evil thing that you would do, you would be held accountable for it. So for somebody that, if we're talking about this generalized statement, does that mean we're going to be held accountable even for the things that we think about? Does that mean it's going to come back to us? There's no cutting corners. And of course, how do we will lay out all of this? So Sayyidah Aisha said, no one asked me about this after I had asked the Prophet ﷺ. And she said, this is basically a pledge between the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and whatever they go through, whether it's a fever or whether it's any calamity that they would go through, or even if that was a thorn that had struck them, or something as simple of having some kind of a good that they're carrying, probably in their sleeve or in their pocket, and then all of a sudden they lose it and they basically freak out that they had lost it, and then finally they would probably find it in their maybe in their valuable items or somewhere else. At the end of the day, that for a believer, everything that they would encounter would basically remove the sins from them, exactly the way that you would remove التبر من الكير, exactly the same way that you would actually remove all the different things that basically when you're التبر من الكير, so التبر when they, before, of course, in order to get fresh and good coal, they would basically have to keep on blowing into things. So here we go. This is basically like telling you that it's going to be removing exactly from that all the other substances into getting exactly what you want. And the same thing, even when you're getting gold, it's removing all the different things, rock, stones, and all the different things when you heat it in order to get fine gold. So it's refining that Muslim in order to basically get a fine believer. All right. So all the things that you might go through, even if it's I lost my pencil, I lost my pen, all of that. Think of it that it's basically refining the believer. And of course, we went into, let's look at that, in where we went into the other ayah, مَن يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى. We also went in details with that ayah, so we're just making sure that we didn't miss anything. And of course, من يعمل من الصالحات من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فأولئك يدخلون الجنة. Whoever does good and we said does, when you look at min salihat, so in other words, partial good. So it wasn't that they were completely 100% good, but they actually did some good deeds, whether male or female, but the condition is that they would be believers. So it's not enough to do what is good. You had to have actually had the belief, the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sincerity. It's not enough to have tawheed, but you also have to have also the sincerity. Of course, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ حُنَفَاءَ وَيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَذَلِكَ دِينُ الْقَيِّمَةِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually mentioned in Surah al-Bayyinah what they were ordered to do. وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. That their faith, their practices, of course, were really sincere for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hunafa, away from the different practices of the disbelievers, and straight to implement, and of course implement it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and replicate the actions and the practices of the Salihin, like Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. حنفاء, so وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة, and to perform prayer and to perform zakah. ويؤتوا الزكاة وذلك دين القيمة. That is the religion of course, perfection. Al-Qayyimah is basically perfection. All right, so when you look at that, of course, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically here emphasizing that there's no good deed that you can consider as being accepted unless the person had faith. So if the person, let's say, donated for the people of Africa, did good, but wait a minute, isn't that so unfair to the people that have actually done good, and where we're going to consider their good actions basically rejected simply because they didn't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Isn't that unfair? Isn't that just an unfair thing? Let me explain it. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically here judging and rewarding the deed, not necessarily based on the deed itself, but based on what you were really committing it for, what you were really implementing it for, what you were really intending for this action. So if the person was intending that they were giving money, let's say, to Africa because they just wanted to be famous. They wanted to be known that they were such nice, kind-hearted people, etc. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, it's going to come back to you, and where, yeah, sure, this is what you had invested for. You invested for getting more people following you. You invested for popularity. You invested for that. Well, that's exactly what you're going to get. It's exactly like any payment that you would do, in where it becomes a pragmatic thing. You invested to buy a house. You got a house. You invested to get a degree. You got a degree. You invested to basically to get something in the dunya. Well, you're going to get that. Then in that situation, you cannot expect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reward you for it just because you invested in something that is generally good, because you actually did it for the sake of dunya. You did it for the sake of people. Then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would simply tell you that why should he reward you for it? You didn't do it for him, so why should he respond to giving you any reward for it? You got the reward, that is. So that's why it's really important to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even for the disbelievers, he will give them the reward that they had worked for. What do we mean by reward that they had worked for? So they worked for, like we said, they worked for getting a degree or working hard to get a good job to become millionaires. Yes, you put an investment in that, you will see that it would bring you what you had cultivated for and what you had basically worked hard for. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises you, is that whatever hard thing you had worked for, that he will, it is part of his sunnah, to mean part of the paradigm, part of the whole thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in nature, is that it will pay off. It will pay off. Your hard work will pay off. What you had invested, it will pay off, but it will pay off in this dunya. And you can't expect that it would be paid off in akhirah because you didn't even work towards that. And that's why on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically say, Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bi wa yaghfiru ma duna dhalika liman yasha. That the Lord Almighty does not forgive that anybody would associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but would forgive all the other sins, which is the ayah that we worked on before. And we went into the ayah. So here we go. We're still on the same page. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ. There's no better deen. And when you look at the word deen, of course, this is a very comprehensive word, but deen includes two things. It includes aqidah, includes what you believe in regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it also includes the practices, the principles that you carry out, the behavior and what you actually do in it. Whether, of course, we're talking about whether what your heart intentions, what you say, and what you do in your day-to-day life. And simply, so this is talking about al-a'mal al-qulub, this is talking about your own a'mal, and this is also talking about your words as well. So these are the three things that basically would be included in your deen: what your heart practices, what your heart believes in, what your mind believes in, what you say, and what you do in terms of behavior. ممن أسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن. So we went into that, and we said, of course, it's not enough to basically just be on the faith, but the person is supposed to be here. Aslama wajhahu lillah. Couple things. Number one is that it actually means that the person is sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, right there, when we're talking about wahuwa muhsan, in where they're actually at the level of ihsan. And we also went in details in Surah al-Baqarah, the tafsir for a similar ayah to this. And we said aslama wajhahu lillah, in where the word wajhahu is basically badal, to mean badal, meaning that it's a metaphor. It basically includes all the different organs in the body, in where what you're capable of controlling. So you've got certain organs you can control and other organs that you cannot control. And therefore, want you to focus on this one. The organs that you control, which basically, oh, I just realized that I have a cup. The organs that you control, whether it's basically your words, it's your of course your hands, your legs, those controlled organs, they're basically the areas of what you're going to be held accountable in, what you see, what you hear. And that's why things that are beyond your control, you won't be held accountable for. So for example, you like somebody, let's say the sister that was having some kind of, let's say, feelings on let's actually make it a brother. Okay, we don't want to do a sister. Okay, let's say a brother was having feelings towards a Hindu sister. All right, but he knew that he cannot get married to her because she's Hindu. All right, so in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not hold him accountable for having those feelings, but unless he would implement it. So, or at least, of course, if he knew that he was having these feelings and he was putting himself into a fitna, therefore he shouldn't be talking to her. He should be keeping distance and, of course, maintaining all the different precautions to keep him away from getting at least, let me say, into having a crush on her. And when he knows that he cannot get married to her anyways. Same thing. If a man were to have two wives, for example, but he liked one wife more than he liked the other, and subhanAllah, I mean, somebody, humans are very complex. It's really hard to actually control why you like X or Y or Z, because the way that we relate to people, subhanAllah, it's different. You may like somebody and you don't really know why, what you like about them. You don't really understand. People are just a blend of a personality, a blend of a certain behavior, a blend of a character, all these different things. It's really hard to understand, well, why do I like that person? What is it that makes me just get closer to them? All of that. And of course, same thing, if the man had multiple wives, that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, Allahumma hada qasami fima amlik fala talumni fima tamliku wala amlik. Ya Allah, this is what I'm capable of course, dividing in terms of justice with my wives. So, Ya Allah, please do not hold me accountable for the things that you control and I don't control, which is basically an inclination towards one wife and having the inclination not in action, but having one inclination in at least love.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry. So I keep having this problem coming up with like reverts, with converts who like they will let's say some like they're a second wife, right? And when it comes to taking responsibility for the family, the like there is no documentation legally that they are responsible for this child and wife. So I know this is a little bit irrelevant, but like how, I mean, if their rights aren't guaranteed, why are people, you know what I mean?
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So two things.
This is a big problem.
It's a very big problem. It's a very, very big problem. And I usually do not recommend the sisters to actually go into a marriage where their legal rights are not protected.
Okay. Sorry, I don't want to get you off topic or anything, but
I could easily get off topic. So
okay.
I'll just say a couple things. Number one, I don't recommend sisters to get into a marriage where their legal rights are not protected. It's not enough to say, well, Islamically, this is halal. All right. I think many times we would many times see sisters actually thinking that if they are Muslim and they're looking like a religious person, this person is an imam at the masjid, and therefore expecting them to be these really pious people. There's so much utopia in within the Muslim community, and even those that would enter Islam, there's so much of high expectations. Many times it would be as if they're not recognizing that these people are actually human. So whether it's an imam at the masjid or whether it's somebody that memorized the Quran, it doesn't mean that they're not going to commit mistakes. And subhanAllah, I mean, it is uhdirat al-anfus ash-shuh. It's part of our own nature that we are greedy. Yes, you will see that we all have some narcissist nature within us, whether you're Muslim or whether you're not Muslim. It's part of our nature that we're always seeking our own interest, and we will give ourselves the justification to basically transgress other people's rights. We will give the justification, well, it's their fault, etc. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically told us in the following ayah. Maybe we could just jump to it just a little bit, just so that we answer this question right there, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, in where in such situation at the end, in that وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, it's part of al-uhdirat al-anfus ash-shuh, it's part of our own nature, that is human nature. So it has nothing to do with faith. uhdirat al-anfus ash-shuh, and where it's part of our nature that we always seek to search for our interest. We're always seeking different ways. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically says here, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, if you were to actually practice ihsan, even though it might not necessarily be just on your end, probably that the lady might have actually called the police and basically did all these different harms and did all these different things, and then you give yourself the justification that, oh, I have the right not to basically give her I guess the support that she needs because of all the harm that she had done to me. So in other words, the person would give themselves the justification to compensate themselves basically for what was done. And it could be true. It could be true that she had actually harmed him. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, no, that's not how you would actually act in faith. You don't have the right to compensate yourself and to be the judge and to be the victim at the same time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling you that you have to be really careful. A true believer, even if you were a victim, a true believer actually acts based on the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what ihsan is. Ihsan is to implement the principle and not necessarily justice. Justice would many times have a lot of different interpretations. Is this fair or is this not fair? Am I able to compensate myself for the harm that was inflicted upon me? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders for justice and ihsan. Basically tells you, yes, al-adl is definitely, justice is definitely the goal. But for a believer, just to seek justice is actually a way and a form of sometimes committing oppression. What? You can actually do justice and commit oppression? Yes, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually telling you in this category, for a higher believer, a person that is aiming high with their let's say goal in what they want of akhirah, it's basically when you're practicing the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when others are not. لا تخن من خانك. Simple as that. Don't betray those that had betrayed you. And when to have taqwa is basically to understand that child support, for example, even if you went in some kind of a dispute with the mother, that does not give you the justification in any way to deny the children their rights. So in that situation, can we actually have people that would embrace the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this level? It's important to mention that these are very few people. These are very, very few people that would actually be committed to this high level. That's the highest level of faith. Very few people you'll actually have committed. So in that situation, don't be utopian. Don't be utopian. And when you want to get married, make sure you're getting your rights protected even legally. but I can't, and there's no way, and all of that. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I guess seek different measurements. I don't know exactly what ways when what you have within within your situation and status. So then I'm just letting you know that please do not be uh, coming in with such high expectations. Unfortunately, you can and you will see and encounter a community that is as human as other humans can be. And they do commit mistakes, they do offenses, they do oppression, exactly like you would see anybody else actually taking, I would say, advantage of a woman if she doesn't have the legal rights to protect and enforce law. So just keep that in mind. Unfortunately, this is the sad reality that many reverts would actually be taken advantage of. So it's really sad that a lot of Muslim men, I would say, taking advantage, and especially with certain groups, they would take advantage of new Muslims, in particularly, I would say, white Muslim white women. Sorry, I'm going to be saying it straightforward. Unfortunately, the reason to it, I would say, is because many times, I think, maybe there are historical reasons, but I would say that especially white women, and many times they are actually taken advantage of, where they would easily think that, hey, we could trespass our boundaries and still get away with it. So you just really need to be really careful. And many times they would get married to them, and unfortunately just deny their rights and just walk away. And they will easily just think, well, they're going to be easy to get married to. I don't have to pay mahar, that's something high. I don't have to, she doesn't have a family backup to support her. She doesn't have, of course, a family to be considerate and give her the protection and make sure that she's actually protected and all of that. So I would recommend, even if you are a revert, although yes, your father even if he's not Muslim, cannot necessarily be the wali, but still do take him as if, unless it's the faith that is an obstacle here. What I mean by that is that unless he's telling you, well, because he's Muslim and I don't want you getting married to a Muslim, but I really recommend, if that isn't the problem, I would really recommend taking your parents, your family, and taking, I guess, their precaution, your brother, etc., taking them along with you to investigate this person. What should you really be looking for in this person? Does he seem like an honest person? Is he hard?
Jazakallah khair. I didn't mean to
These things
get
are
you off.
important. Nura, even if they're not Muslim, they will be the ones to really give you a backup. And
Yeah, because I mean, even though they're not Muslim, like they do care about
they
their own
do care.
daughter. I mean,
Absolutely.
usually, you know.
Usually, they really still care, even, even if
Yeah.
they're not Muslim. I would really recommend, there are certain pragmatic sides that are irrelevant to faith, whether the person is working, whether your rights, your financial rights are in place, whether you have a place that is basically matching, let's call it a decent living. All of these areas are actually important to keep in mind, because many times they can easily slip a woman's mind, because many times women are really focused on the emotional, romantic side of it, and not necessarily the pragmatic side of it, of what actually, let's say, what actually is important on ground. What's important on ground is, well, how much is he um, making? How much is that other house? If there's another wife, for example, how much is he paying for that? All of that. I know right now women, because they also work, they do taxes and all of that they have become better at it than before. But let's just say, get a second pair of eyes. Get a second pair of eyes and get some help to help you make the right decision, because many times they do find it a lot easier to just, oh, I'll easily get a divorce if it doesn't work out and just walk away as if nothing had happened. So I'll get whatever I want and just walk away. She'll do her iddah, whatever, even if she doesn't want to do her iddah, who cares, and move on. So just make sure that you're not seen as really just a spare item out there, a spare good looking item out there, and make sure that you know how to protect your rights. And remember, people will consider you valuable when you yourself recognize your value. And this is important. If you don't recognize your value, how do you expect others to recognize it?
And that's a good advice for any sister, subhanAllah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When they get married to, for example, an Arabi woman, a Pakistani woman, oh, you will see they will really pay a lot in order to make this marriage work out. They will really pay a lot. They'll pay the mahr, they'll pay the wedding, they'll pay all these different things. But then when many reverts, they would actually get married, and it's like, oh yeah, we'll just go to the imam. He'll basically document it, and yeah, we'll probably pass out, I don't know, chocolate chip cookies and milk and celebrate and just go home and we're all done. So to the man, hey, this only costed me what? A pack of chocolate chip cookies and some milk. Okay, here we go. That was just really what, $12.95. Not bad. And even for the ring, yeah, we just went to the next door shop and they basically sold us a ring for $200 or $300 and we're all set. We didn't need to go. Versus if you were to get married to a Pakistani or Arabi woman, it's going to cost them more than $20,000 right there. So what does a man look at? The final bill? He sees it as, well, that really costed me a lot. I really had to put in a lot of investment to actually get married to this woman. And that's when, of course, the more costly, even if you were to look at a product, if you paid more for a product, and sorry, I mean, a woman is not a product, but this is how, some men would actually look into it as. They paid more. They paid $20,000, and they'll take care of it. And take care of it and be considerate over it. But if they just paid, and that's why even things that you will actually get at cheap store, they'll basically not take care of it as well. So you just need to value yourself, and you need to understand
Very good advice. Jazakallah khair.
It's really sad to actually say that. Please don't misunderstand. I know many sisters are going to misunderstand and think that I'm really being maybe offensive to some sisters by considering them that they're they're like a product or etc. I'm just telling you how a man looks at this, not how I see it. I see it as, you are a valuable person. You are to be treated with value, and therefore I'm just telling you, please value yourself. That's all I'm saying. All right, I'm not at all saying that you're a product. I'm just telling you how men see it. All right, where were we? Noura, it's your fault. Now this one's really your fault. All right.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's all right. That's all right. But that's actually very, very important to say. And Allah barik fik if I bring this up. All right. وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا. I want to look at this one. اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا. We're still in that same ayah that we were doing just earlier. Of course, وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا. So basically within this ayah, and of course, the word Khalil, the word Khalil is really, really rather interesting because this ayah really wanted to jump. Let's look at it. So this ayah basically says, وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, that this person that basically is on the best level of deen, they would submit their face or submit at least their organs and what they control to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would be muhsin. They would be basically doing what the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are saying, and they would follow and replicate the principle, the piety, the word millah, the deen. And of course, when you're looking at the practice of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, you're basically adopting the way that he submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Hanifa, we explained that one. وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا. That is, in English, this is an incoherent sentence. In Arabic, this is not an incoherent sentence. in English, if we were to say وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, to change the part of speech in English, they'll right away mark it and say you cannot have your words directed. Let's say your sentence is basically directing at one person, and then you're changing the part of speech. Okay, so let me explain it right here. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever is basically practicing the best of the deen and follows Prophet Ibrahim's path, basically, and then it jumps into a different part of speech and says, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken Ibrahim as basically the one that is chosen. And you could see this change of speech. How did you change from person 1 to person 2 to person 3? In English, this is considered definitely bad phrasing. In Arabic, this is not bad phrasing. And when you want to judge a language, of course, you would have to consider the language within its rules, within its grammar. So in English, in Arabic, sorry, وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا, this is basically to answer the question. This is really interesting. So when it says وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, it's, well, why Prophet Ibrahim is the question that comes to mind. So that's where that coherence in Lugha Arabiya, in where it says, okay, I understand your question, and then it goes into bringing in the answer in the following question. But of course, there are no quotation marks in the Quran. So right there, the Quran right there just goes into a flow without quotation marks. But in order to bring about coherence in thought and also the coherence in words. And the question is, well, if it said, اتخذ الله إبراهيم خليلا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taken Ibrahim Khalil. What is a Khalil anyways? What is a Khalil, and how can a person actually be a Khalil, and why even so? So this is in order to say, well, it's an encouragement for you to say, well, we want you to follow the path of Ibrahim. What is going to be the outcome? Well, the outcome, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he was embracing a certain principle, a certain practice, the outcome of it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually chosen him, anointed him, and of course, taken him at a high level for something in where no one else, not a prophet, not any saint, no one actually made it to this level. What is that level? No one, not even a prophet, was considered Khalilullah as Prophet Ibrahim. Yes. Well, what does that even mean? Well, let's explain it. So al-Khalil, in order to explain al-Khalil, you really need to go to the origin of the term to understand it. Al-Khalil was actually called Khalil because the word, the root of it is actually khalala. And the word khalala actually means to have deep love, all right? Deep love. And that deep love, it just goes all the way. Look at this word. مَحَبَّتَهُ تَتَخَلَّلُ الْقَلْبِ. Allah. What does that mean? That his love basically penetrates into the heart. Penetrates. There's what, an outside love? Yeah, you can love a person. I like
That's
this
so
person.
beautiful,
It's so
mashallah.
beautiful. It's like, no, but there's this deep love that goes all the way in where it basically, in each and every single portion, in every single cell, it basically went deep into the heart. And therefore, فَلَا تَدْعُ فِيهِ خَلَلًا إِلَّا مَلَأَتْ. And that it does not leave a single empty space in the heart, but fills it. It's just, this is so beautiful. It's like there's not a single empty space, not a single space, but the love had completely filled the heart. And that's why when you say اتخذ الله إبراهيم خليلا, in where he was loving and truly loving for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also loved him. Yes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved him, and he completely loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, some scholars said it was also to mean anointed. So there's no contradiction. If the person had deep love, therefore they were the ones that were chosen for this position. If I love you more than anyone else and you had the highest level of love, that means you would actually be chosen. So there's really no contradiction. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has اختص إبراهيم في وقته للرسالة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically chosen, or basically had basically given an anointment for Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam during his time for delivering the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want you to look at this one where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, he basically said, لو كنت متخذا خليلا لاتخذت أبا بكر خليلا. Even the Prophet ﷺ said, if I were to take a best friend, I would have taken Abu Bakr as my best friend, as my favorite friend, as my anointed friend. And of course, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam doesn't mean that he didn't like his other companions, but there is definitely a favorite. And when you look at Khalil, it's not only just about love, but it's also about al-istifa. And where the person was chosen for a mahabbatam, for a complete love. And the reason also for that is because he was always just after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where he was always desperate for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love. And of course, he was not putting in his need and his own interest in as his center, but he was actually putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as his center. So it was basically not as his self-service, that is not serving himself, he was serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was completely devout to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want you, this is really rather interesting when you actually talk about how devout he was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how faithful, how much conviction he had to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically said, اتخذ الله إبراهيم خليلا, that he was actually living with strong conviction that no one ever lived with his conviction whatsoever. Is it possible that and it's possible when you look at even الخلة بين الآدميين, is it possible that we can have friendship even between the people, have such kind of friendship? And it can happen that we can have such kind of friendship. We can call a person Khalil. So Noura would be my Khalila. Well, but here's one thing. Khalil is usually, all right, is usually a different kind of love. So when we're talking about people, all right, it would more be a lustful relationship. But that doesn't mean that it's always lustful. But many times it can have a connotation as that. So just, be careful. All right. Especially during our times, this can actually have a connotation that it sounds rather perverted. So just be careful. And of course, that doesn't mean that this ayah right there. So if somebody told you this is perverted, you're going to say, well, what the Allah Ibrahim Khalil? Are you going to call that perverted as well? So absolutely not. Of course. So just keep up with that backup. All right. And of course, al-khulla is basically also meaning that when we're speaking about the human relationship, in where there is a friendship between people, and where one is basically completing the gap of the other. So that's why when we're speaking about الرجل على دين خليله فلينظر أحدكم من يخالل. Maybe I should have actually highlighted this one, in where the Prophet ﷺ actually said that each one is basically adopting the conviction of their friend. So if your friend is a person of piety, a person of conviction to the faith, you're going to find yourself carrying out and replicating your friend's conviction without you realizing. So the Prophet ﷺ said, right? They should have actually, instead of here, a comma, they should have actually put a semicolon. فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلْ. So therefore, you should actually be considerate and look out for who you really are friending. In other words, so who's the one that you're friending? It's really the one that you spend most time with, the one that you probably would remember when you're in need. You'll basically reach out to them. The people that whenever you want to have fun, you would basically reach out, hey, want to go for a coffee, etc. So all of that, that's basically il-Khalil. That's basically il-Khalil. And of course, when speaking about il-Khalil, it's important to consider that when you're taking a Khalil or you're taking a bestie or a best friend, you want to consider that are they the people that will be living up to not only the faith, but also up to the need. Let's see this beautiful poem that I thought it would be good to say. So Hassan ibn Thabit, just an idea. Hassan ibn Thabit, he was one of the companions for the Prophet ﷺ. Hassan ibn Thabit, he actually got married to, Mary al-Qibtiyya, her sister. Okay, Mary al-Qibtiyya, the Prophet's concubine who refused to be a wife, but she remained as a concubine to the Prophet ﷺ. And Mary al-Qibtiyya, she had a sister, Nisreen. All right, he basically had married Nisreen, basically Mary al-Qibtiyya's sister. All right, so that would that be a brother-in-law for the Prophet ﷺ? No. What would that be in English? I forgot. If they're two people married to two sisters. In Arabic, we call them adil. I don't know what it's called in English. Help me. Okay, so let's say the poem that he had said, أخلاء الرجال هم كثير ولكن في البلاء هم قليل فلا يغررك خلة من تؤاخي فما لك عند نائبة خليل وكل أخ يقول أنا وفي ولكن ليس يفعل ما يقول سوى خل له حسب ودين فذلك لما يقول هو الفعول. Ya salam. He said, the friends for a man are many, but in the case of calamity, they're very few. So don't be manipulated when you would actually befriend somebody, but فَمَالَكَ عِنْدَ نَائِبَةٍ خَلِيلُ. If you have too many friends, but in real calamities, you would probably find no one there for you. Every single brother might actually claim that they would be the friend in need, but the ones to actually do that are really few. Siwa khillin, the only ones to do that are really the ones that really have at least, let's say, a connection, hasab, a history, and even a piety, and they would be the ones that would really be committed to what they had actually said they would be there for. Beautiful poetry, right? All right, let's see. وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا. For the Lord Almighty controls everything that is in the skies and everything on earth, and the Lord Almighty is encompassing all. How did we actually go from that sentence to this sentence? Let's see. So we went into وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ, and then we went into وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Let's explain. So this sentence is related to this sentence because somebody might say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took Ibrahim as a Khalil and might misunderstand the word Khalil because usually Il-Khalil is supposed to be there as a companion. Il-Khalil is there as a supporter, etc. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, no, Ibrahim is not a supporter because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need support. Why doesn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala need a support? Here's the answer. Because the Lord Almighty, everything He owns in the skies and on the earth. And the Lord Almighty encompasses everything. So therefore, when He took Ibrahim as a Khalil, it's not because the Lord Almighty is in need of anyone. So your submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not because He needs your submission or your submission in prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether you had turned your back from worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether you were devout, as in the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم, if the first the first creation and the end of the creations, and in other words, all the people, even from the humans and even from the jinn, were actually as pious as in were devout in their heart as the best and the most pious person in this world and even in history, that would not actually increase anything in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's property, in His authority, in His power. And therefore, even if all of you, the first and the end of the generations and the humans and the jinn, were at the heart and the lack of conviction as the most lack of conviction that anybody could be, and ever had anyone had lived, it would not decrease in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power whatsoever. Exactly like when you were to prick and put a needle inside an ocean and bring it up, would it actually reduce the water in that ocean by putting a needle inside the ocean and bring it up? There's just a drop. But does that mean that the ocean reduced the water? Absolutely not. Same thing in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically here laying it out in where, yes, understand that this conviction does not mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in need. In this right there, the anointment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to Prophet Ibrahim does not mean that whatsoever that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was in need for his support. So this is to explain the word Khalil so that it would not be misunderstood that he needed a friend and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was lonely and he needed Ibrahim as a friend. Absolutely not. This is absolutely not. So people would not misunderstand the word Khalil and think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was in need of anyone. And that's why he says, وَلِلَّهِ. The word lillah actually means here al-mulkiyah. In other words, ownership, power, authority, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that has ownership, He's the one that has authority, He's the one that has power over samawat, all the skies. What is a sky? So a sky is anything that is above you, whether they're called gases, whether they're different levels of gases, that's called a sky. Or whether it's basically your own ceiling, that's a sky. So Isama is anything that is above. All right, Isama is anything that is above you, whether it's a ceiling or whether it's floor 2 or floor 3 or whatever, that's going to be sama. But here, as-samawat is not talking about your ceiling, but it's talking about all the different galaxies, all the different discovered or undiscovered galaxies, anything that is above you, any different levels of gases that they might actually be above you, those are samawat. وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, and anything that is on earth. Al-Ard is basically earth. So this is not including planets. This is actually speaking about planet Earth that you live on. All right, so anything. And I want you to look at here, the word ma is more comprehensive than man. So if we were to say وَلِلَّهِ مَنْ فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, it would actually have a different meaning, a different connotation than وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. What's the difference? The word وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَوَاتِ is basically including anything that is having intellect and everything that has no intellect. So the word ma is a lot more comprehensive to include the things that are thinking things and things that don't think. So why do we have some ayat that are saying man fi samawat? Well, this is an indicative that there are creatures in the skies that we don't know of that are actually thinking creatures. Aliens, perhaps, But we do know from the Quran that there are creatures that are considered thinking creatures in different galaxies, in different skies. When you look at ما في السماوات وما في الأرض, this is including thinking and non-thinking creatures. So this basically is to show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only is He the owner of all the different items alone, but enforcement as well. And He also controls the forces that basically contain as-samawat and al-ard. All right. So when you look at ma fil ard, same thing in where things that are thinking and things that are not thinking. Okay. Now, when you look at man fil ard, if we were to use the word man fil ard, that would mean that this would be exclusive to thinking creatures. But here, this is not exclusive. This is inclusive to mean ma fil ard, everything that is on earth basically belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically is under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's authority, and also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power that is controls its forces. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا, and of course giving in the affirmation right there that the Lord Almighty in everything, whether we're talking about even outside of skies and space, or whether outside of earth, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bikulli shay'in. So even if you were to ask, well, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where does His power basically reach and end? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that's the point, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bikulli shay'in muhita, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power and encompassment, whether in knowledge, whether in control, or whether in ownership, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in His power, control, and ownership encompasses all of that. The word muhit is important because the word muhit, in order to understand the word muhit, the word muhit actually comes from the root ha wa ta. The word ha wa ta actually means to circle something. Okay? Ha wa ta and ihata is basically to circle something when you're surrounding something. All right. So when you're looking at the surrounding piece of it, this is basically to show you that there is no margin. So this is what al-ihata can mean, that everything is included inside this circle, is basically within the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So does that mean that there is, hey, if we were to draw a circle, there's something that is outside of the circle, right? And that would actually not be included inside of the circle. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, everything cannot go outside of the skies and the earth. So therefore, everything is within this circle anyways. So that is basically the circle of creation. That's the circle of creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses it all. This is really important to actually look at, because when you look at Ayat al-Kursi, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum, that the Lord Almighty is the one that is al-hayy, that He is the one that is of course the eternal one, al-qayyum, the one that exists in basically self-existent, and nothing basically brought Him into being. Al-hayy al-qayyum, la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. No weakness basically overcomes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not a weakness, la ta'khudhuhu sina, not even the partial of sleep and not even sleep. Lahu ma fi samawati wa ma fil ard. He controls, same thing right there, in where lahu, He owns, He controls, and certainly that it all falls within His power, authority. Lahu ma fi samawati wa ma fil ard. What is in the skies and what is on earth. Lahu ma fi samawati wa ma fil ard. Man dha alladhi yashfa'u indahu. In other words, and who is there anybody that can actually intercede beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, because He controls everything. So even when it comes to worship, therefore one is supposed to be turning to worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه. Now there goes يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه. So therefore you look at that ayah right there. يعلم, He knows what is ما بين أيديهم. ما بين أيديهم could be literally what's in front of you, and could be metaphorically to mean your future. وما خلفهم, وما خلفهم, what is behind you, literally, or metaphorically, what is behind you, that means your past. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your future or what is literally in front of you or your past metaphorically. يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه. Here's the same exact word right there. ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء. And they would not actually be capable of sharing, getting, or even be يحيطون to get, and of course share or at least get some knowledge in any piece or any part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills you to get. So this is al-ihata. Al-ihata can be in ownership, in authority, of course, and in knowledge as well, and certainly in force. So this is al-ihata. Al-ihata goes in different ways in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is controlling everything in this world, and therefore وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ. So he encompasses all. This is basically also to understand when you understand the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they also show encompassment. So it's not that the names are contradictory, it is to show encompassment. All right, now it takes us into a different topic, sort of. Let's see, where it says, وَيَسْتَفْتُونَكَ فِي النِّسَاءِ قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ فِيهِنَّ وما يتلى عليكم في الكتاب في يتامى النساء اللاتي لا تؤتونهن ما كتب لهن وترغبون أن تنكحوهن والمستضعفين من الولدان وأن تقوموا لليتامى بالقسط وما تفعلوا من خير فإن الله كان به عليما. I'm going to give you just a general translation, and they ask you about women, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer and give you the answer to your question in regards to them and what was actually recited in the book in regards to the orphan women that you would not you did not give them, and you would not give them what was decreed upon you, and you would desire to marry them, and also the children that are vulnerable, and to also give the orphans their rights in justice. And whatever good that you would do, then the Lord Almighty would be all-knowing. This is probably the worst translation on earth. Okay, the reason why I say that is that I'm just trying to show you, if you were to actually take a translation and do a word-by-word translation, that's how it would sound. Is that what the words are saying? No. I did translate, all right, but it's still not giving it what it really needs to I would at least I would say it's not fair. It's not a fair translation. Okay, يستفتونك في النساء. So how did we jump from يستفتونك في النساء, and it was actually talking about وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ? How did we jump from talking about faith here to talking about nisa? Because part of faith is implementing justice. So if you want to practice faith, it's not some utopian practice. It's actually a practice, especially towards the vulnerable. Remember, the surah is actually called Surah Nisa. So it was trying to get to you that when you really want to be a person that is considering what it means to abstain from wrongdoing, what it means to actually do what is right, what it means to actually implement and embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Prophet Ibrahim. You want to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encompassing everything. You want to know that there's nothing that you can go outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's encompassment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's property, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's authority. So therefore, practice justice. And of course, the Sahaba asked about the women and their rights and how do we deal with women. And of course, in a society where it doesn't have the law protecting women or even protecting the vulnerable, the ones to be victims are going to be the women and the children and the orphans. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right there, speaking of...
And if you can't have justice at home, how are you going to have justice in the society? Right?
Absolutely. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there saying, well, speaking of justice, let's talk about speaking of the rights and the justice to women. So the Lord Almighty says, well, your Lord Almighty would be the one to give you the decree, answer, the basically detailed answer of what actually makes justice. You don't interpret justice based on your terms, but you would interpret justice based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's terms. This is important because many times we want and we would want justice to be based on our terms. And most of the times, be careful with this one. Most of the times, you would actually see people coming to you and telling you, well, what does Islam say? And then you'll say, what, this is what Islam says. And they'll say, no, I don't actually think that makes sense. What they really are trying to say is that if Islam does not bend to consider their term, and if Islam is basically going against their definition of justice, that to them this is injustice. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, the one to define justice is Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not bend to you. You bend to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's terms. So therefore, when you do your salah, you bend to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the same exact thing. You don't just make bending during salah, but you also bend even if it goes against your interest. You bend it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And especially when we're speaking about, you brought about the reverts, all right? Especially when we're speaking about these women that might not actually have had, let's say, the legal witness, the legal backup to give them their rights. You have to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you right there, يَسْتَفْتُونَكَ فِي النِّسَاءِ قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ, your Lord Almighty, He's beyond the government. He's beyond any area. So you better watch out and don't think you can cut corners, because the second you thought that you can cut corners on different wrong things and think you can get away with it, think again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there. بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا. Don't think you can cut corners and think that you can somehow run away with it, because the Lord Almighty, He's the one that is laying out the definition of justice. He's the one that's looking to make sure that justice is actually implemented. The second that you think you got away with it, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is muhita. He is encompassing everything. You can probably get away with it now, but you can never get away with it forever. For dunya and akhirah, it will come back to you. Don't cut corners on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You think you're cutting corners and making it easy on yourself? Think again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that's basically going to hold you accountable. So here He says, وَلِلَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ, your Lord Almighty is the one that's basically defining justice for you, defining principle for you in regards to women. And وَمَا يُتْلَى عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْكِتَابِ, and all the different things that were recited, that were revealed onto you in regards to basically all the different rights, whether it's mahar, whether it's divorce, whether it's iddah, whether it's child support, all these different things. And of course, for men, women are really the place of the center of family. That's all. Of course, men don't like doing business with women. Men usually don't like engaging in pragmatic life with women. That's why they'll come home, they'll have a certain family life, but then they will always have these male companions and these male comrades, and where they relate with them differently. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells you, well, that was speaking of women, there are certain groups in where that was actually mentioned in the beginning of the surah, in regards to the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually permitted polygamy. What about it? Remember when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ what is the beginning of the surah? Oh my God, I forgot the beginning of the surah. أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. Here we go. If you fear that you would not be just to, of course, the women, and of course this is talking about the women, اليتامى, even the women, she had already reached the age of puberty. How is she called the Nisa? So this is basically a general term. a general term. So once, even if she reaches the age of puberty, right now she's in an marriageable age. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, those women that you wanted to abuse, basically, their yatam and nisa, you abuse that they didn't have the backup family. You abuse that they were orphans, their fathers were not there. And this man, basically, because this girl's father basically died, so this man takes it to take care of this girl. And now that she reached the age of puberty, she's got money. So he starts thinking, well, if I'm the guardian here, I'll just get married to the girl. And that way I'll have the girl. Plus, I'll be the one in power over her money. So therefore, I basically get two things, the money and also get the girl. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right there was emphasizing the rights for those women that many will actually abuse. The women that are orphans right there, that did not, that those men, they did not want to give them their financial rights, and they had desire to marry them. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling them, well, I want you to implement justice in regards to these women, because you want to keep in mind that such justice, قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِكُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that defines it. So therefore, you actually think that you can have the intention and your own narcissist motive really make that victim unaware of your motives behind all of this, and play the game that you are loving her, but what you're really loving is the money. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, He's the one that basically defines justice and oversees that it is implemented. And same thing, المستضعفين من الولدان, same thing, those that are vulnerable. مستضعف, المستضعف is basically the person that is seen as weak, seen as having no backup, seen as vulnerable, from whether the children or that, of course, it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, and it is basically your responsibility and taqumu, to give support to the orphans in what? Based on justice. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِكُمْ فِيهِنْ, and the Lord Almighty is basically giving you the details, and He's also giving you and what it means to to actually act in justice. And remember, whatever good that you do, the Lord Almighty is all knowing, and He knows all the different investments that you would be doing. So therefore, do not consider any good deed that you would give to the orphans, to the vulnerable children, to the women, and specifically the orphan women. Whatever good that you do, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically going to be the one that will be rewarding you for it. But that would also mean whatever transgression you had committed and whatever motive you have in mind, and where manipulating others or manipulating the children or the orphans and thinking that you can get away with it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ, whatever wrongdoing you will be doing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually hold you accountable right there. And let's see what al-Qurtubi says in regards to that ayah. He said it was revealed because some group of Sahaba, they actually asked about women and, of course, their rights in inheritance. So the Prophet ﷺ basically revealed this ayah that they ask you about them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent the details in regards to their rights. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ many times was actually asked. So the Prophet ﷺ, that's why you've got ayat that would say, يَسْتَفْتُونَكَ فِي النِّسَاءِ يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ يسألونك عن اليتامى يسألونك عن الجبال. It was really when the Prophet ﷺ was asked multiple questions. So that's why these ayat would actually come in, let's say, in the prelude where it would say يستفتونك يسألونك etc. So here's the response to such questions. And of course, these are the ayat right there. And of course, بيتلى عليكم فانكحوا ما طاب. We talked about that and where that فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من النساء. So basically this ayah is related to, of course, that ayah, and we went in details. So if this ayah is related to that ayah, why was it actually put in another place in the surah? Why not put it right after it? All right. So this is called tawqifi. Let me write down the word. This is called tawqifi. What does it mean? Tawqifi. Tawqifi actually means that tawqifi actually means this is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered the Prophet ﷺ to basically position the ayat, and therefore we don't change the position. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the ayat to be in their final coherence. That's the way they will continue. And that's the way we would basically read the Quran in this way, and not necessarily read it based on the time of revelation. And therefore, they actually make new Qurans in where their expectations, or at least that's according to some some mufassirin, they will say this surah was revealed after that surah. And of course, we've got reports of that. But to reorder the Quran and reorder the ayat is basically going to be a form of tahrif. What is the word? The word is tahrif. It's a form of tahrif. What is tahrif? Tahrif is basically a form, let's say right there, tahrif. Tahrif is a form of changing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a form of making a reinterpretation, not based on what the words are saying, or the words and how they were revealed, but it's basically putting in a self-infusion and not necessarily what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed the Quran in. So this is a form of tahrif. It's a form of changing the actual words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is for that ayah. And of course, hey, we've got time. وَإِنِ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا نُشُوزًا أَوْ إِعْرَاضًا. Let's look at that. So wait a minute. So here it was talking about women. Then it goes in and speaks about وَإِنِ امْرَأَةٌ. If a woman feared from her spouse nushuzan, some form of I guess, injustice, or at least an objection, some form of in where they're going beyond them, or to turn away. So who's the one that's actually committing in the shoes here? It's the man. So the man, he did before the women doing the shoes, and now it's the man doing the shoes. So what is the solution then? So the man is turning away and committing the shoes. He's basically disregarding the woman's rights. Then فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَن يُصْلِحَا بَيْنَهُمَا صُلْحًا. So there's no sin in making a reconciliation between them. And reconciliation is best. It is part of the souls to be stingy. And if you were to act in al-ihsan, in piety, and have taqwa, then the Lord Almighty is all knowing of what you do. Such a horrible translation. Let's go in details. Yeah, this is going to be really fun. Okay. In imra'atun khafat. So when we look at, let's go back to right there. So if we're talking about in imra'atun khafat, if a woman were to fear, so when we say a woman fears, in other words, there isn't an actual thing happening. She's afraid that might actually happen. He might actually commit nushuz. He might abuse me. He might want to leave me. He might this. So nothing actual happened. But she's seeing some red flags that something wrong is coming up, or probably anticipating that I'm seeing red flags and I'm starting to get worried here. All right. So in that situation, you could see that when she's afraid of nushuz, And there's a difference between النشوز and الإعراض. What's the difference between النشوز and الإعراض? النشوز is when the person is distant away, of course, from probably implementing her rights. So what does that mean? Let's say she's right there, married, but then all of a sudden he's changing. He's not spending enough time. He's basically just constantly spending more time with his family, spending more time with his friends, or spending more time with his second wife. And why? Well, basically because probably you got old, maybe different reasons. And as much as you tried to work to get him into at least, hey, reminding him, remember, I also need quality time. You also need to spend time with me. I need this. And you could see the red flags in where even his liking, he doesn't like you as much. He doesn't, you could see there's this type of nushuz in where he comes home, yeah, okay, even if he were to spend time, even if he were to come in, but he comes in really crabby. The second that he steps into the house, he's crabby right there. You could see that they're red flags. He's just not happy. He's not happy. You tried to make him happy. You cooked his favorite food. You cleaned the house. You dressed in your most beautiful clothes. You bought the most expensive perfume, but still something is wrong. And of course, in these things, many times they can not always be explained. SubhanAllah, it's just hearts, and sometimes you can do all the things that you want to do, all the different things that you try. You do all the necessary things, but it's just not working. Let's say it that way. And or al-i'rad. And al-i'rad in where, all of a sudden he's not even talking, he's not even finding any relationship, and ولا يأنس بها يأنس بها. In other words, even when he's home, like we said, he's just crabby, he's just not himself, and you try to do everything. So do we necessarily say, well, the solution is a divorce? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is here, she's afraid. So there's another alternative rather than going for divorce. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَن يُصْلِحَا بَيْنَهُمَا صُلْحًا. There's no sin. In other words, this would be a form of telling you, well, there's something better than divorce. What happened? See, Sauda ibn Zam'a, we have to understand the ayah in the lens, and through the lens of the context of when this ayah was revealed, or at least the different stories that basically would give us what really happened for the revelation of this ayah. So Ibn Abbas narrates that Sauda bint Zam'a, she was married to a guy, his name is Sakran. I know his name is weird. Sakran actually means drunk, but she later married the Prophet ﷺ. So after marrying Khadija bint Khuwaylid dies. The Prophet ﷺ then marries Sauda bint Zam'a. Sauda bint Zam'a was already beyond and way beyond her 50s. She was an older woman. She was the only wife to the Prophet for some while, and later he married Sayyidah Aisha. All right. So later, of course, when he married the other women, the Prophet ﷺ, of course, Sauda bint Zam'a now got really old, and she basically felt that the Prophet ﷺ was feeling, it's like this marriage, it really can't really continue like that. So she asked the Prophet ﷺ to not divorce her and to keep her as a wife. And she didn't want to be, perhaps, not all women, just a note on the side, not all women have the same bodies. So I'm talking about intimacy here. Some women, I've had women in their 60s actually tell me that they are really feeling that they've got a strong desire, and that their desire is even more than when they were teenagers. Believe it or not, it really differs from one woman to another. I've had women in their 60s and women that were Women that were in their 20s actually tell me that they don't have any desire whatsoever for intimacy. So it's not an issue of age. I think it's an issue of probably hormones, probably a number of different things in the body. So it's not an issue of age. So you could see Sauda bint Zam'a was obviously not into intimacy, and that's not what she was seeking. So in that situation, she was, afraid that, well, if there's no intimacy, that means I guess I'm not into that anymore, and therefore might actually mean that I would just get divorced. So that's why she basically proposed to the Prophet ﷺ that don't divorce me, and I'll just basically donate, or I'll basically give up my day for Aisha. Since she's younger, she's basically, your favorite wife. I'll just stay as married to you. And that basically was the choice for a number of different wives from the Prophet ﷺ. They weren't intimate with the Prophet ﷺ, but they stayed within the marriage, the marriage at least uh, uh, relationship. And of course, this ayah was also explaining that some of them, of course, there's also an ayah in Surah Taha as well. So in that situation, is it possible that a woman maybe that she's not into intimacy, or she's finding that her husband is not into being intimate with her, and can they still be married? And this is important to keep in mind. If I've had a number of different cases where you'll be really surprised. It has nothing to do with age, but they just didn't want to be intimate, or they just didn't want that type of relationship. But she still wanted to stay married, but they didn't want that type of relationship. So in that situation, فلا جناح عليهما أن يصالحا بينهما صلحا والصلح خير. So there's no sin where they could have some kind of an agreement, some kind of at least a reconciliation between them, and at the end it's permissible. In other words, they don't have to live based on the book. All right, so the book here is basically telling you that there is room for an agreement in how you want to stay within the marriage, but at the same time you don't necessarily want to live by the book to actually mean in where you're being intimate, you're being basically dividing your days in the same amount of time, you're spending the same amount of time, etc. All of these different things. So this is different than misyar. Let me explain it right here. Il-misyar is different. What is misyar? Il-misyar is different. Il-misyar is a new form of marriage that is right now, becoming a big thing in the Gulf. Il-misyar is different because il-misyar, they went into a marriage, and the woman, I guess she had a lot of money. She basically didn't want but a marriage relationship in where he would come every once in a while, basically have intimacy with her. So and he's married to her, and she's giving up on her rights. She's like, I don't need you to come over and divide my days equally with my co-wives. You can stay married. We can stay married. I don't want you to even spend on me. I've got my money. I'm a millionaire anyways. Don't need you to spend on me, and not even on the children. Don't worry about that. I just want to be in a marriage relationship. I'm too busy to actually be a wife. I just want a halal relationship every once in a while. So I'll basically be spending on myself. I just basically want that relationship. So this is misyar, and scholars actually had differences of opinions on misyar. Some scholars totally objected to it and regarded it that basically opposes and contradicts the whole idea of marriage, that a marriage relationship is not a business relationship, and therefore to make an agreement in that way is really risking the whole definition of marriage, because marriage is also about creating family. It's all about all of the different things that relate to making that dynamic of what marriage really means. So that's the first group of scholars. They oppose that and consider it as haram, and basically as a void marriage contract. The other group of scholars, they consider that is permissible. She basically decided that she wanted to give up on her rights, and they used this ayah as their evidence. They said, well, you could see this ayah right there, just as there is a chance or a place of reconciliation or a place of agreement, even in situations where she basically decided, gave him, you know what, I don't want you coming over, I don't want this, and basically accepted that, and they made this agreement. So if they can make an agreement in a state of him basically being the person to commit nushuz or basically turn away, and they could still do a reconciliation and agreement, well, that's the same thing in state of misyar, in where if they can make an agreement and that she doesn't want a complete marriage, she just wants a relationship that is halal and she'll take care of all the finances, then in that situation, it's basically supposed to be as halal and not haram, and the marriage is actually having the same exact pillars of a valid marriage contract. We've got the consent, we've got we've got the consent, we have the of course uh, the two adults basically right there with her wali right there, and of course we've got at the wedding, we did the wedding, and but there we've got of course the sadaq and all of that right there. So we've got a marriage that basically has the witnesses and all of those, basically is a complete marriage, but she's giving up on how the dynamic of this marriage is played out. So in that situation, if she herself is basically giving it up, therefore, the second group of scholars, they said this is permissible. They both agreed on it. Why not? If they both agreed on it, based on this inspiration from this ayah, but they both agreed on it. So therefore, that second group of scholars, they considered it as permissible. The third group of scholars, they basically, I guess, were in between opposing and in accepting, and put in some other conditions into how they make this contract, and said, well, there are certain things in case such a relationship does not happen and there are children involved, etc. And if, for example, she loses her job and from being a millionaire to then later being bankrupt, what actually happens then? They basically had laid out certain conditions. All right. So when you look at the revelation for this ayah, in where she basically said, well, I'll just basically accept an agreement in where she didn't want to be intimate, she didn't want to be in the marriage relationship in where she gets her days divided equally with the other wives. So in that situation, she basically just gave up on her rights, at least of course with her own consent, and she did it with her own willingly, and in that situation, of course, based on this ayah. All right, well, here's a question. There is another narration in where it said that it was Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib or al-Musayyab, both ways to say Musayyib, and Musayyib is actually right. He hated the name though. All right, that Rafi' ibn Khadij, he basically had Khawla as his wife, and she was the daughter of Muhammad ibn Maslama. But then, of course, Rafi' ibn Khadij, because she was growing older, and I guess he was, of course, and this is important. It's important to keep in mind that when women get older, especially during the age of menopause, it's normal to actually go through probably hot flashes, change of mood, and even change in the desire. Now, at the time, they didn't have OBs to give them estrogen to kind of help them fix those moods and fix those changes. So then, of course, the relationship can sometimes actually change. And that's why I would see a lot of women in their 40s actually coming forward and complaining that their husband is changing, the relationship, she's seeking divorce, etc., and not really realize that it's not that the husband had changed, it's that she is actually going through hormonal changes, and that the outcome may not be realized is that that is actually inflicting also on the relationship and intimacy as well. So that's why it would be really important to understand the changes that women go through during menopause, and certainly the help that she can get through her OB, and that the changes, learn more about it to learn more about what can be done. But of course, in situations where you still feel that you want to keep away, instead of getting a divorce and probably losing a lot of rights, I want you to look at here, because by getting a divorce, you might actually need to get a job, and you're definitely, getting older. You definitely don't want that. So you want to stay within a marriage, at least get, of course, get a rent paid, getting those areas at least, the areas of probably even him being around the children, coming in home, and of course being around the children where you don't have to wear hijab, and it's completely different. It's a completely different dynamic if this man just becomes a divorcee or an ex, compared to, well, if things are not working out, and we at least maintain a marriage relationship, but um, create create an agreement. I can stay in the marriage, but at the same time, he's not completely, at least in a complete marriage relationship. So that's where this area brings in the solution rather
I have
than.
a question. I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. Do men kind of go through like a kind of that? I mean, not the same obviously as women, but with the hormones when they get older. I'm sorry, I don't know.
So, I'm not a medical expert to answer what men go through. And of course, we know medically, though, that their ability to create at least sperms, in other words, their ability in their fertility does actually change from one age to another, and that their body definitely goes through certain changes. There's no doubt about that. But medically, I'm not I'm not a medical expert to know exactly what kind of changes that they go through, in which age that happens, and what are the signs of it, etc. But I guess in women, because they're more vulnerable and more dependent. Of course, he's the qawam, so they're more dependent on him. So that actually creates some form of vulnerability if you're dependent on him. If you're dependent on him financially, you're dependent on him in decision making, you're depending on him at least in being, let me call it, that authority when when the man comes home. The children are all, right just when he steps into the door. The children, each one is taking, their Quran or taking their role, and one is picking up the garbage and one is fixing everything. All of a sudden, they're just the good kids. But when dad is not home, they're either fighting, they're either arguing, they're just being themselves.
That's so true. SubhanAllah.
This is real.
Sorry, I didn't mean to I just wondered because you said, with the women's hormones and stuff, it can cause a problem in marriage. So I was just curious. Sorry.
I'll tell you, I guess I'll just say from an anecdotal piece of it. We already know in psychology, and we already know that men also go the mid-age crisis. So we already know that that is true, that there is a middle-age crisis, and there is the fluctuation even in their ability, even to be intimate, their ability to, of course, engage and even handle the stresses around them. It basically changes even within the middle-age crisis. And that's why, I guess from the anecdotal piece of it, in where you would find more men at the age of 40 coming forward and wanting a second or a third wife. And I'll also say, I come from a very polygamous marriage, so I can definitely put this anecdotal piece of it in where, especially at the age of 40, the changes do happen. And at the same time, I do see that if the father, that, in other words, that the father-in-law, his father, uncles, etc., that they were polygamous, the chances are that that he too is going to be polygamous. All right. So it seems like that there is a genetic component here. It would be really interesting if you could educate me on that. But I'll tell you just from my realization that there is something that I could see these patterns out there. That some families are more polygamous than others. Some families they do actually go through, let me call it, a harder and a harsher mid-age crisis than others. So just yes, definitely, something to bring about. An expert probably tell us more about what it means to have a middle-age crisis for a man. And do they also go through something similar to menopause? That would be really interesting to know. I don't know medically.
Inshallah, inshallah. Jazakallah
Yes,
khair.
I don't know medically, but I will tell you just anecdotal. Yeah, yes, something really interesting is flying out there. But at the end, is there where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out the options instead of going for divorce, laying out the option where, hey, can we bring about some reconciliation, some form of agreement, rather than ending the marriage, bring about something. And where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells you that yes, it can be possible that we may not fully understand the real motives behind this relationship being at risk of falling apart. And of course, each one is basically, and this is another word to probably, maybe I could, right there, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling us right there, it's part of our own nature that we always seek our own interest. We always recognize when others transgress their limits on us, but we don't transgress our limits on others. This is real. And knows what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you. You may not recognize when you're transgressing on other people, but you certainly recognize when other people transgress your limits. And you recognize when you're a victim, but you don't recognize when you were the oppressor. And this is common. And of course, that's where it's really sad that right now, I've mentioned this before, that right now, we're actually seeing most therapists actually ruling, and this is the feminist, it's part of the feminist agenda, really, in where tainting and painting men as if they are all narcissists, and not really realizing that it's part of manhood, and where there's this fine line between what makes masculinity and what makes narcissism. The evil motive and to make somebody basically just work and submit to you, to your interest, but not to their interest as well. That's a dangerous thing. That's an evil thing. That's an evil thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there laying out where many times such things can happen, where we're only seeing our own interests and we're not seeing other people's interests. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, if you were to actually act in the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and even have taqwa, that is basically the best in that situation. So here's a question. When we're looking at this narration in al-Bukhari, so here it is. It's Sayyida Aisha said that when this ayah was revealed, she said, الرجل تكون عنده المرأة ليس بمستكثر منها يريد أن يفارقها فتقول أجعلك من شأني في حل فنزلت هذه الآية. So it was a common thing, Sayyida Aisha explained, that it was common that a man would be married to multiple women, but then this woman basically goes into an age, of course, and of course, here she was talking about into an age, but it's not that when she got old, he's feeling, don't need this woman any longer. It's that there are certain expectations that whether a pragmatic relationship in where what you actually want in a relationship is really a certain benefit. So what you would want in a relationship is a certain benefit. The benefit probably him spending on you, the benefit having a companion, the benefit probably family, the benefit, etc. Same thing for him. Same thing for him. The reason why he went into a marriage is also for a pragmatic reason. He was seeking a certain benefit. So it's a mutual benefit in where how much I'm capable of giving you and how much you're capable of giving me. But the halal and the imbalance happens when that person, whether it's a wife or a husband, is seeing that the reason and the main object of why I went into this relationship, you're not capable of providing. The reason for it is unknown, but you're not capable of providing me what I had intended from this relationship. And this is really important to keep in mind that many times, sisters, especially sisters, they would think of a marriage relationship as something where it's just, I would say, more of a romanticized relationship, but there is something where there's a pragmatic piece of it. There's something that I would give certain things, you would give certain things. We're expecting something in return. So it's not just an issue of, well, let's just make it some form of just happiness. No, there is some form of investment that is actually supposed to be there, whether it's an investment in where you're investing to probably create family, investment in relationship, etc. And it's really strange. Many times people would come and ask me, well, there's this debate that between scholars on whether it's a woman's responsibility to work at home or whether she's supposed to be getting a maid or etc. And I would say that this is a very futile conversation, because if you were to look back when the ayats were revealed, the Sahabiyat never questioned whether that was their right or not. They basically lived to recognize that the relationship throughout history and throughout our ancestors, in where there's a certain job that I have to invest in, and there's a certain job that he has to invest in, and that it's not whatsoever a relationship where it's just my relationship to just sit there, basically work on my nails, put one leg over the other, sit on the couch, and just wait for him to call me for intimacy. Never whatsoever did scholars actually say such a thing. Where does this confusion come from? This confusion actually came during the 5th and 6th century Hijriya, in where what happened is that the books of fiqh were getting canonized in a form of kind of like a constitution, sort of. And the definition of marriage, they basically started, I would say, circulating the same exact definition. And the definition was for marriage. And the reason why they had that definition, I'll explain it in just a bit. They basically defined marriage as حل استمتاع رجل بآدمية. It's basically, if you look at that, it's a weird, it's a very canonized and a very weird, I guess, let me write it down. حل استمتاع رجل okay, here we go, sorry, the رجل بآدمية. All right, it's the permissibility of having a man having pleasure in a woman, in a female woman. Okay, and although it sounds very weird to define marriage in that way, but you had some scholars took it literally. And therefore, from this definition, they said a woman does not need to be in services other than intimate services. And therefore, she doesn't have to cook, doesn't have to clean, doesn't have to do any of that. And, the reason why the scholars have actually put down and laid out is not to say that marriage is exclusive to intimacy, but is the reason for this definition was in order to lay out what actually acts as an outside criminal relationship, sexual relationship that is considered a crime. What is a relationship that is not permitted in Islam? So therefore, they basically define that if a relationship or any type of a sexual relationship outside of the marriage relationship would actually be considered
basically an offense, basically a crime, and therefore that would be considered an assault. And in that situation, they would be held accountable for it. And of course, that would be the fine line. So this was really a definition in order to lay out what makes an offense and what doesn't. But then, unfortunately, you had many people misunderstand it and think of it, well, it just means that she doesn't have the duty to actually clean. Is that the way the Sahaba and the Sahabiyat understood their role and their responsibility? The answer is absolutely not. They understood that the relationship was supposed to be where there is an investment within the household, where we would work, we would clean, we would work in the fields or work at home, etc. But that's what actually makes our life continuous. And that's the way our ancestors had actually. If one would go hunting and the other one would basically come, stay home, clean, take care of the kids while the other one was hunting, and then, or whether it's working outside, providing for the household, and the other one is basically doing the same thing. But I guess the confusion happened when right now you could see the feminist, I guess coming in with all these, I would say, I guess, deconstructing, and that's the philosophy of deconstructionism, and we're deconstructing everything, and we're deconstructing what it means to be female. Oh, there's a social role and there's a biological role. Deconstructing what it means to be a wife. Oh, there is the role of intimacy, and there's the role of same thing. We're seeing that this is coming in within the Muslim rhetoric as well. We're seeing a lot of women actually adopting this rhetoric and applying it in there. And unfortunately, we have a lot of da'iyas that have no fiqh. And of course, da'iyah, female or male da'iyah, they would do the khutbah al-Jum'ah, and they would basically say Islam gave women the rights and therefore they don't have to clean, they don't have to do this. And of course, everybody, all the women's like, yeah, exactly. Whatever extra thing we do is basically nothing but an extra thing, and I don't have to. And what we're seeing is that our marriage is breaking apart. And of course, it's really sad to see that the more religious, the more confusion. What happened? It's not that the more religious, the more confusion. It's that we're seeing people not understand the religion right, not understand the religion right. And what we end up with is really more confusion. So just keep that in mind, inshallah, because it's really definitely past in our times. And by the way, it's not just the more religious, believe it or not, the more educated, the more likely the marriage is to not be a successful marriage. This is real. Believe it or not, most of the girls that were studying with me at the university during Kulit Sharia, listen to this. They married a lot of the guys that were studying with me in Kulit Sharia, in the College of Sharia College, basically. Most of them got divorced. Most of them, their marriages didn't work out. You know why? Many times we're just over utopian in our expectations of what we expect from a religious wife or what we would expect from a religious husband. Being too utopian is not being realistic. Being too utopian is actually having these high expectations where you too might not recognize that you're not actually living also by that. And you're saying, no, I'm doing such a good job. But remember, you're going to recognize his weaknesses, but you don't recognize yours. No, that's not really true. I've got different witnesses. Oh, you've got the witnesses that are supporting your attestment, your testification. But not everybody actually agrees with that. If I were to bring on his side, if I were to bring from his at least from his people, and will I find people that will also support his claim? Oh, certainly will. I sure will. I know I will. And that's why it's really important to just just wanted to lay these things out. I know that there are many women sometimes to, speak in this way that many will be hurt and many will think that I'm talking about them, but we're all human. So yes, I'm not talking about something that is not realistic here. I'm actually talking about things that come to me, things that basically are human, and therefore certainly you're going to find some of the things that I'm talking about either relating to you, relating to your friend, relating to your mother, etc. You're going to be finding it really touching some of those stories. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong with my words. All right, so inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow, inshallah, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I guess they're like, you already passed your limit. Are you serious? All right, let's actually stop right